Dalkaen here, and this is my review of I Am Setsuna for PC. I think to understand I Am Setsuna, you need to understand Chrono Trigger, the legendary Super Nintendo RPG on which it is primarily based. There are some other influences here and there, such as some of the earlier Final Fantasy titles, but I Am Setsuna is as direct a tribute to Chrono Trigger as it possibly could be. It's surprising, really, that a game with as enduring a legacy as Chrono Trigger hasn't seen more in the way of sequels or homages. It's an intimidating legacy to live up to, since it is almost universally adored by JRPG fans of my generation, and rightfully so. Chrono Trigger, of course, was released in 1995. I have fond memories of begging my mother to buy it for me, and for some reason I recall it being $70, and I'm not sure why that is. Anyway, it was a collaborative project from then separate companies Square and Enix, popular for the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest series respectively. This was of course a period of time where both companies were putting out absolutely stellar games, so it really was a perfect storm. The product of their collaboration went down as one of the finest examples of the genre. It differentiated itself from other turn-based RPGs of that time period by integrating combat onto the main screen. Once enemies were encountered, a menu would appear and battle would begin. This doesn't seem particularly novel today, but it did lend a unique feel to Chrono Trigger. I Am Setsuna reuses this mechanic almost exactly, with the only real wrinkle in the format the fact that encountering enemies from behind gives your party members a chance to strike first. This means that if you have a powerful area of effect attack ready to go, you'll wipe out your enemies without taking any damage. This is not possible nearly as often in Chrono Trigger, since enemies are likely to get a few hits in before you can do anything, especially in active mode. I Am Setsuna takes place in a melancholic, wintry world under constant threat of, what else? Monsters. As is so often the case in JRPGs, the monsters are becoming ever more restless, dangerous, and organized for reasons that will of course become clear over the course of the game. I'm going to be honest, I'm more than a little fatigued of the threat in these games always being monsters. It's so generic and forgettable. Where's the lore, the significance? This is probably not an area on which I should launch into a rant though, since I went into this one knowing full well that originality was not going to be its strong suit. Players take control of silent protagonist Indir, a mercenary tasked with assassinating titular character Setsuna. I feel it's no real spoiler to indicate that Indir doesn't quite go through with it, but of course Setsuna is already destined to die anyway, as she has been chosen to embark on a pilgrimage to the Last Lands, where she must offer herself up as a sacrifice. Evidently, this is the only way to stymie the tide of monsters flowing into Winterworld's various towns. The specifics of this procedure are left pretty vague, but there is an air of traditionalism to it. This has obviously happened many times before, and it is accepted as a necessary trade-off for surviving in this harsh world. Apparently, the last pilgrimage was unsuccessful, which lends further importance to Setsuna's journey. Times are especially tough. Inevitably, Setsuna acquires allies on her pilgrimage because so many recognize the importance of the sacrifice's cause. Like Chrono Trigger, each of these party members have distinct personalities and also fill some sort of strategic niche. Indir possesses an array of physical and support skills, whereas Setsuna, Eterna, Kier, and Julian align themselves with the elements of lightning, time, fire, and water, respectively. All elements from Chrono Trigger are represented, although time as an element is a new invention. How damage can be time elemental is a bit of a head-scratcher, but I'm sure I've seen that somewhere before. Indir's personality seems to be mostly a blank slate, since all of his dialogue is determined by the player. You're essentially given two choices. You can be virtuous or you can be kind of an asshole. I have discussed before that I don't particularly care for silent protagonists in this kind of game. Obviously, they're fine in RPGs in which you create your own character, but the concept in character-driven RPGs has never really gelled with me, even in classics like Dragon Quest and, yes, Chrono Trigger. Suffice to say, Indir's personality never really crystallizes, much like Chrono himself. Other characters are at the very least interesting. Setsuna is virtuous and selfless to a fault, whereas Nidar is valiant in the face of grappling with awful failures in his past. Eterna is determined and single-minded in her quest to protect Setsuna, while Kier is wise beyond his years. Julian is a knight who will do anything to protect those dear to her. The characters' personalities are splashes on a canvas, but they are painted in different colors, and they are memorable in their own ways. I think part of what makes Chrono Trigger so memorable and replayable is its excellent combat system. It utilizes the active time battle mechanic first introduced in Final Fantasy IV, in which characters take their turns once a gauge fills. The rate at which this gauge fills is dependent upon that character's speed stat. This was very successful in Final Fantasy IV because it created a lot of tension in combat that was absent from the first 3 games of that series. You had to think fast and plan ahead to make sure your party is being regularly healed or you'll fall quickly. This is part of why I still like Final Fantasy IV a lot to this day. Final Fantasy V and VI expanded on the active time battle mechanic by displaying a visible bar to indicate which character's turn would be next. Chrono Trigger, next in line for development, adopted this system as well with one distinction. Players are afforded the opportunity at the very beginning of the game to choose between two modes, active and wait. I Am Setsuna continues this tradition. The difference between these two modes is simple. In active mode, enemies continue to attack while you decide what commands to input, whereas in wait mode, the action pauses while you make a decision. Obviously, the former creates a lot more tension and makes combat significantly more difficult. I never considered Chrono Trigger a particularly difficult game, but on active mode with max battle speed, it's an entirely different story. Those early Final Fantasy titles allowed you to choose between these modes as well, but defaulted to wait and had the option to adopt active mode away in the menu. Chrono Trigger presents you with a decision before you even start the game, perhaps without preparing you for how much of a difference it makes in the gameplay. In the interest of full disclosure, I'll admit that I decided to use wait mode in I Am Setsuna, but used active in my most recent replay of Chrono Trigger for a little extra challenge. I'm not sure I was prepared for how much more frustrating it made the game. I felt like I barely had time to make decisions in combat and frequently had characters die while I was navigating through menus to select a healing spell or restorative item. Combination attacks are the bread and butter of I Am Setsuna's combat system. Chrono Trigger featured a pretty decent variety of skills and combination attacks, but that variety pales in comparison to the sheer number of techniques available in I Am Setsuna, even if each character can only have a certain number of these techniques equipped at a time. In Chrono Trigger, each character learned a total of 10 skills, many of which could be combined with other characters in combos. Each of these characters had a total of 3 combination techs with each other character, except for Magus, he's way too cool for that. Additionally, every party composition involving Chrono could eventually employ flashy triple techs. Even several non-Chrono party compositions could use these triple techs, although only through the use of special stones hidden throughout the game. I Am Setsuna opens up the floodgates for possible combinations, featuring combination techniques for every possible party composition and duo, regardless of whether or not Indir is in the party. For comparison, there are 70 triple techs in I Am Setsuna, 2 for each different possible party composition, and there are only 15 of them in Chrono Trigger. Beyond active time battle and the combination system, I Am Setsuna expands on Chrono Trigger's battle system in some other ways. The game's characters do not learn their skills in the traditional way simply by leveling up. Instead, players must collect materials from defeated enemies to obtain relics called Spritnite, which can be equipped much like materia from Final Fantasy VII. Command Spritnite contain unique skills specific to a certain character, whereas Support Spritnite can be equipped by anyone. To collect the requisite materials to unlock these Spritnite, enemies must be defeated in a variety of different ways, such as with a specific elemental attack while debuffed or with an amount of damage very close to their exact HP total. Hunting down specific materials from monsters and filling out their loot charts is a pretty fun mechanic for the most part, but I'll admit it got tedious on a few occasions when I was struggling to pick up some of these characters' final skills. Characters can only equip a certain number of skills, active and otherwise, at a time. They'll unlock more slots as they gain levels, and many talismans also add a few more slots. It's frequently necessary to switch out skills depending on the particular party composition to make use of different combination attacks, or just to be better equipped for the battle at hand. It's not as simple, however, to determine when a new combination attack is possible as it was in Chrono Trigger. I didn't discover until halfway into the game that I could check the Snow Chronicles menu to see which combos I'd unlocked so far, based on the Spritnite I had obtained. The game further expands on the Chrono Trigger template by including the Momentum Mode and Singularity mechanics. Momentum Mode is actually a brilliant and simplistic inclusion to the format that expands the combat beyond just simply selecting an attack and targeting an opponent. If you've built up your momentum gauge and have acquired at least 1 SP, you can expend it by pressing a key as the attack begins, triggering a bonus effect dependent on the type of skill. You might restore some health, deal extra damage, extend the duration of a buff. There are a large variety of these effects. There were some skills I'd never used without Momentum Mode, such as Setsuna's Prayer, which restores MP and is buffed to guarantee a critical hit in the mode. I'm somewhat less excited about Singularity, which triggers at random and imparts a variety of bonuses to the party, like double ATB speed or increased drops. The game seems to hint that it's triggered by something, but it is never clear on exactly what that is. Another random and somewhat unsatisfying mechanic is Fluxation, which also triggers randomly at the end of combat depending on what talisman you have equipped. A random bonus is imparted to one of your equipped skills, and you can choose to either accept or decline it. This might have been more interesting if I felt like I had more control over it, but the only control you're given is the ability to equip talismans that boost the chance for certain fluxations to occur. The game seems to be balanced in such a way that these fluctuations can more or less be completely ignored, so it seems like a throwaway mechanic at best. The game's battle system takes the best of Chrono Trigger and expands on it in as many ways as possible. And yeah, some of these expansions are not entirely necessary. While I for one appreciate the dramatic increase in possible combination attacks, I could have done without flexation pretty much entirely, since it's unintuitive and not very exciting in the first place. I never felt the need to equip any talismans other than those that gave me substantial extra skill slots for this reason. I Am Setsuna has a very singular, consistent aesthetic. Everywhere you go is blanketed in snow, and the soundtrack consists almost entirely of plaintive solo piano. Even the most adventurous of tunes are done entirely in piano, which admittedly is a pretty cool idea, but it doesn't do much for the game's breadth of content. It leaves everything feeling a little samey, which is unfortunate since the combat system offers an astounding amount of variety. It left me feeling a little disgruntled while vanquishing the third or fourth recolor of a common enemy in yet another copy-pasted snowy forest or ancient ruin. I felt like I wasn't given very much room to experiment with the excellent combat system, particularly since the game barely cracks 20 hours of playtime as it is. Now, it's perhaps unfair to dismiss I Am Setsuna for being a roughly 20-hour game, since Chrono Trigger itself would struggle to meet that playtime even with side quests. However, I'm still going to do it because I firmly believe I Am Setsuna could have been broader in scope, more ambitious than what we received. Yes, the number of combination attacks is staggering, and the combat system as a whole is, minus flexation, wonderful. But there are far too many reused environments and enemies. I mean, look at Chrono Trigger. My most recent replay of that game came in at around 15 hours, but during that short period of time I visited prehistoric times and fought an ancient race of sentient reptiles, stormed a powerful wizard's castle in the Middle Ages, explored the ruins of a dystopian future civilization, and plumbed the depths of an undersea palace. In I Am Setsuna, I trudged around in the snow a lot and I killed some penguins. I think that really says it all.